The enigma that is Christian Eriksen. Is he pulling his weight? Is he worth 150 grand a week? This is your e-Spurs podcast, Extra Time. Hi guys, welcome to Extra Time this week. This is your e-Spurs podcast, a little bit on the side that dares to answer back. This week on Extra Time, we'll be getting your thoughts on our big talking point of the week, which, as I say, is Christian Eriksen. And this week, we asked you guys on Twitter and Facebook, is Christian Eriksen worth 120 grand a week, which is what we've been led by the press to believe that he was at one stage demanding. Now, I know consequently he's come out and pretty much denied all that on Twitter and social media by saying don't believe all you read in the media. However, he's yet to sign that contract still. So there's still work to be done with Christian Eriksen in more ways than one. We know there are lots of views on Eriksen as in terms of the type of player he is. Does he have enough impact on games? And tonight we'll be discussing all of that with the e-Spurs team. I'm joined by Jason, by Ricky and John tonight, and they'll be giving you their thoughts on exactly that in just a moment. We've also got your thoughts on Christian Eriksen and what you think about the contract situation. So let's kick off Extra Time this week. Let's go to, where should we go? Let's go first up to John. John, Christian Eriksen, does he do enough for you to justify being a top four midfielder in there?
Well, that's a question. I think he's... Do you know what? I don't know the answer to that question, to tell you the truth. In my opinion, I think he's one of those players that we do... I want to keep him. I do think he does enough in terms of shirt sales, probably. But
and I should add the caveat that, you know, we're not here to... None of us are here to knock Eriksen. This podcast tonight is all about just establishing what's going on with him and in terms of not only his contract, but his consistency. So, you know, there's no doubt we all love Eriksen as a player, and on his day, he's fantastic, John, isn't he? And that's what we're here to really get to the bottom of.
That's definitely right. When he's on song, he's a fantastic player, and he's one of those players that he can produce a moment that will get you up off your seat, which is, as you know, as Spurs fans down the years, we've been quite spoiled, I think, with players who can do that. And I think maybe it's just because he's probably of the seven, the magnificent seven, as they were called, of the two still there. He's by far, you know, the more important out of him and Chadley, I think.
Yeah.
I do think that also that player that in this, you know, modern generation of FIFA players. You know, if we sign a player, my 12-year-old, first question he'll ask me is, what's his rating on FIFA? And I think that's part of the problem because he was seen as this, you know, fantastic young player who come to Tottenham when he probably could have gone to a lot of other bigger clubs, probably. And the fact that he did come to Tottenham, he's been there, 3 or 4 years now, and he's not really shown the kind of development that I think most people thought he would. I think that is the problem.
Yeah, and he does. I mean, you know, we saw a couple of seasons ago, he pretty much carried us through with his free kicks and, you know, the goals he scored. It does seem to have dropped, though, doesn't it? And that's the point here. And Jay, I mean, we've got Champions League football now. We're now top four club, hoping to establish ourselves as a regular top four club. Despite that, Eriksen's still yet to sign a contract, despite the fact that we're in the Champions League. So has Eriksen, do you think, is Eriksen outgrowing Spurs, or are Spurs as a Champions League club outgrowing Eriksen?
I wouldn't say either of those things, Andy. I think, you know, first of all, I think if we pick our strongest team, if we all wrote down our strongest team on paper, there might be one or two differences, but I think we'd all probably have Christian Eriksen in the side. So in that respect, he is definitely one of our first team players. But I think, you know, he's growing. I think he's grown probably at the same rate that Tottenham have. We're just into the Champions League. We're not an established Champions League club yet, and he's not an established superstar yet, but shows the potential to be one. So I think he matches us perfectly in that respect. But, you know, I think the big question with Christian Eriksen is, we all know what an excellent player he is. It's the number of good games that he has, and it's perhaps the level of play that he has when he's not having one of those good games. And that, you know, I think as Rick mentioned about Eriksen and Lamela starting to do now, even if he's not having a great game, he still has an impact on the game.
Yeah.
And yet perhaps with Eriksen at the moment, when he's not having a good game, he has no impact on the game at all. And that's probably the side where he needs to improve a lot.
Is that down to work rate for you, Joe? I mean, with Lamela, we certainly see him, as you say, chasing back for the ball there, don't we? But with Eriksen, it we don't necessarily see that, as we mentioned in the podcast earlier in the week.
I'm not so sure it is, because, like I said, I think earlier in the podcast, his stats from last year, he covered more ground than anyone else. So, I mean, it might be down to work rate, but in a strange way, it might be down to almost too much work rate, in that he's too busy chasing around sometimes. I think from the game at Everton, one of the things that I noticed with him, he kind of chose the wrong option several times in the game, and maybe it's a question that coming in from the left, that the game's invariably on his right foot, and perhaps he's looking to go both ways. I noticed a couple of times there when he got the ball Saturday, almost on the edge of the penalty area on our left-hand side, he was still looking to go both ways, and of course there's no room to go left because he's already out there.
Yeah. So
you're perhaps cutting down his passing options, but the whole thing with that front three is it should be flexible enough where he can drift as long as other people are drifting as well. And I think, as John pointed out, we saw it was Lamela that started on the right, but that scored his goal from the number 10 position, and that perhaps Eriksen's just got to almost have that personality and drive to realise that he's got to move from the position sometimes that he's in.
Yeah, absolutely. You think that comes through the coach. He's got to, be coached into if he hasn't got it naturally, and I'm sure that's something that Pochettino is working on. Rick, in terms of the contract situation, because as we say, although the rumours about the pay rise have been dismissed pretty much, there's still this subject of the contract not having been signed. So if you're Levy sitting there, how far do you go, bearing in mind the consistency or the lack thereof that we've seen from Eriksen over the last season or so? How far do you go if you're Daniel Levy to keep Christian Eriksen?
I think it'll go as far as Poch wants him to go. I mean, if Poch is an integral part of the squad, then hopefully you would tie him down. But I think with Levy, the case has always been that every player has a price. And I think with Levy, it's shown in the past. I mean, we us having this contract dispute with Bentaleb when it got very, very public, and in the end, he ended up signing the contract. But there was still a bit of taste left in the mouth, and you've seen now how Bentaleb's kind of fallen out of favour with Poch, and he's moving on. So it just concerns me a little bit that there's been this kind of, it's been brought to the public's attention, the fact that Eriksen hasn't signed the new contract. It is a concern, but it's a concern as much as how much Poch wants to keep him and how much Poch sees him as part of the future at Spurs. For me personally, I love Eriksen, but the problem, like we've said on this pod, is that his day is once in every 4 or 5 games, where it needs to be on a more consistent basis. And like I've said previously, I think the only way you're going to get that consistency with Eriksen is to sign an alternative in order, so that kind of gives him that kick up the you-know-what. Because at the moment, he's kind of got no threat to his position, and therefore he knows that even with a bad performance like the one against Everton on the Saturday, he'll still most likely be picked for the game against Palace, and that's the problem we've had. I think now, looking back, I know it sounds silly, did we sell Gylfi Sigurdsson too early? I know there were two very similar players, but you see Gylfi, in terms of the set pieces he offers, and he's very similar to Eriksen, where he's got a great set piece delivery, and his goal ratio for Swansea last season seemed to be quite decent. I'll just wonder now whether we would think to ourselves, if we kept Sigurdsson, many said we couldn't have two players of the similar thing, but in all honesty now, I think that having an alternative would really spur Eriksen on. But in answer to your question, I think Levy will go as far as hopefully Poch wants him to, because we can't be seen again as a club to start losing our best players. It's been a summer where that hasn't happened, and under Poch so far we haven't lost any of our best players, and long may that continue. But I don't think Levy's a chairman that will be held to ransom. And at the moment, I can safely say Eriksen wouldn't be justified to be on 150 grand a week. I think we can all say that.
It's a tough one. Whenever you're talking about leaving negotiation, it's always, you're talking long, drawn out sagas, aren't you? So we shall see. Ultimately, we all hope that he stays and becomes that next level player with Spurs in the Champions League, I think, because we've certainly seen he can do it. Quality player. John, what have you got on the social media?
Right, so first up, I've got Chris Gregory. That's at Chris Greggs 1992. I think there are better players out there earning less. We aren't currently a club that pays that, so no, he isn't. He isn't worth the 150 grand. Then we've got Dark at Go Dark Horse. Outside of set pieces, Eriksen is dispossessed of the ball quite often, failing to see creativity as of late.
Yeah, and that obviously that's two that we took from the responses that we had. And Eriksen, I think, any game you'll hear cheers for Eriksen. I think he's a fan favourite there, isn't he? It's just that frustration that comes through that he doesn't impact the game as much as we'd like to see, especially now we see. I think the rise of Eric Lamela has maybe highlighted the deficiencies in Eriksen's game a little bit also.
By the same token, I was just about to say, maybe the rise in Eric Lamela's game was brought on by us buying Heung-min Son.
Yeah.
And really, if you think, Chadley's not in the picture anymore because Dele Alli's taken over from where he was. And, if you go cast your mind back 12 months, Lamela was going, wasn't he? He was going to France or somewhere after we'd signed Son. He ended up that he stayed, and he had a good season last season. And, he started this season where he left off. I think he's been involved in 7 goals in his last 7 Premier League games. And I think he's become one of our most important players very, very quickly, in my opinion, because he has had that competition of, a big money signing. Son was, £22 million. So he's had to up his game, and it's sort of a case of now or never. And I think with Eriksen, I get that feeling from him, maybe in his agent as well. Although his agent we don't know how reliable these claims are, but I always think with Eriksen, he sort of sees Tottenham as a bit of a stepping stone. Whereas Eric Lamela, although he's coming for massive money compared to Eriksen, I don't think he sees it in that way. I think he still feels like I've got to prove myself. Whereas I know Eriksen, I've read before that he's got this career plan and he knows where he wants to be at certain points of his career. And I think that if he doesn't knuckle down, it could well be that Tottenham's the best that he could do, and he still would have had a good career if that happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he's got to make sure that he doesn't, he just doesn't fall off the edge of a cliff like some players have.
I just wonder if Eriksen's maybe seeing all the silly money that's being thrown around at the moment, by the Man Cities, the Chelseas, the Arsenals, not Arsenals, I should say, the Liverpools, and maybe the wages that they're paying at the moment, and maybe that's. Some of the quotes that we've heard of other Spurs players' wages, as we mentioned earlier on, if they're true, then it's absolutely scandalous that half of them are on the wages they are. And I guess it's credit to Daniel Levy that he manages to keep the players there and Pochettino on those wages. It's incredible, really, when you think about it. But we shall see. Jay, what have you got from our lot on social media?
I've got from, I think we know this man, don't we? Ian Gunn.
Oh, that rings a bell.
I think we know him well. In a word, no. If you pay that, where does it end? It ends up with clubs going bankrupt, and he lacks consistency. We've got from Jason Aaron at Fraggle29. We have more influential players in our squad earning less money, and they should be on 150 grand a week long before Christian Eriksen. And I've also got one from KG William at KG Will 2012. Not doing enough to earn that money in either department, goals or assists. There doesn't seem a big will to get the chequebook out for him. Certainly not on those demands.
No, let's hope his agent's not listening to the podcast tonight. It's I think it's a bit of two things. I think the silly wages that we see the top 4 clubs paying, I think there's a realisation that it is crazy money. And although ultimately I think that you've got to pay those wages to become a next level club, ultimately, you can understand why people would say he's not consistent at the moment, so why should we pay the money? And I'm sure that's probably along the lines that Daniel Levy's probably thinking at the moment as well. I think he will, as John said, sign another contract, but certainly not on the rumoured figure that was being bandied about, because I don't think anyone would receive that during Daniel Levy's time at Spurs, 150 grand a week. I don't think that's going to happen. Rick, in terms of the looking forward, Christian Eriksen is going to be key, isn't he, in terms of this Champions League campaign, if we are to get out of the group. So this contract really needs to be you would think, be sewn up as soon as possible, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the thing you've got is the longer the window's open, there's going to be constant, links that if he hasn't signed the contract, then is there a concern we may cash in on him? And we just don't need that disruption around the squad. It's not great having these kind of rumours around the club. That's one thing that hasn't really happened among Poch. You've got to say, since the Poch era, we've not been linked with anywhere near the amount of players that we used to be. Used to pick up the paper every week and it'd be constantly changing names. There does seem to be a lot less leaks coming out of the club, which is only a good thing, I think. So in answer to the question, we want this to be sorted out as soon as possible. My thoughts are that it will be sorted out as soon as possible, because I think the player does want to stay. I think Spurs want to keep him, and I think there is probably some there is probably smoke. There's no smoke without fire, and therefore there probably is some truth in that the wages is what the separating difference is at the moment, and I think the plan needs to be realistic. And at the same time, I think Levy as well needs to be mindful that you can't just keep expecting to give players 35 to 40,000 a week, because we're in a different, the market has changed now in terms of funds. You're looking at Man United, they're spending over 100 million to buy a Premier League midfielder in that hasn't even played in this league, and they had him originally under their wing anyway. They brought him back for that amount. So there has to be a certain understanding from Levy that prices, money, it changes, it goes up. And if it is a player that Poch really wants, then let's keep him. I'm all for what the manager wants at the end of the day. I'm being completely honest with you. Long gone is what I really care about, because I've seen it down the years that you get close to these players. The last player I got really close to was Robbie Keane, and I thought Keane would never leave Spurs, and I'm going off track here, but Keane left Spurs to Liverpool, which I never thought was going to happen, and therefore for me I never try and get too close to players with the fear they may end up deserting you. So really for me it's about who the manager wants, and if the manager wants to keep him, then I want to keep him. Simple as that. Yeah,
I think we'd all love, wouldn't we, to see Christian Eriksen banging in that winning goal at Wembley in the Champions League, next season. And just to put you all at your ease, I won't be presenting the podcast in my pants if he does do that, because that's not a pretty sight for anybody. But he's a quality player. I really do hope he stays and gets it sorted. What you got on the social media finally for us tonight, Rick?
Okay, so I've got Simon Archibald at Brazy_10, who says he's on 35k. If his agent asks for 150, he'll end up on about 80 or 90, which is the going rate. I've got Pete Richardson at Medium Pete 83, who says he's not a game changer or a defence breaker, which is what we need from him. If anything, Lamela and Ali are above him in that way. Interesting.
Yeah, it is, and it's a really good topic this week actually, because there's a lot of feeling on Christian Eriksen, because I think we all want him to do well, don't we? And I think that's where, if there is any frustration coming across, that's where it comes from. Just to finish up tonight, we've got a couple of my own from the social media. Chris Duncan at Coach Chris 80_83. He says Eriksen is a decent player, but if he is genuinely demanding that much money, I suggest he starts looking for a new club. And Harry Sharalambus says Eriksen is one of our best. We have to keep our best players, even if they are very inconsistent like Eriksen. Eriksen can do more and be better. So I think, a positive spin on the subject to end it there. Those are your views on this week's e-Spurs Talking Point. Thanks to each and every one of you for getting in touch with us. We'll do exactly the same again next week. Keep an eye on our social media where we post the subject for each Extra Time Talking Point every week. Normally about Friday or Saturday, they go up on the social media and give you guys a chance to have your say. Don't forget to catch the e-Spurs podcast on Monday, and then Extra Time again. We'll be back next Thursday. Let's hope for a nice first home win of the season on Saturday from Ricky, from John, from Jay and myself. Have a great week, guys, and as always, come on you Spurs.